So my name is Kimberly Clinch. I'm a Citizen Empowerment Coordinator for American Promise, along with my colleague Rosie. One sec, Rosie, you're off mute if you want to give everyone a quick shout out.
Oh, hey everyone. Happy Monday.
Awesome. All right, and we'll look forward to hearing from Rosie later on in the call. Thank you to everyone else who's on this call right now for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for the August 2019 American Promise Association National Conference call, a call that happens on the second Monday of each month. Whether you're here live or listening to the recording afterwards, you're stepping up to save our democratic republic, so thank you. Tonight, I have the honor of talking with our guest speaker, Jim Rubens, former state senator from New Hampshire. After we hear from Senator Rubens, we'll pass it over to Vicki Barnes, our Minnesota State Coordinator, who will be sharing grassroots insight. From there, Rosie will discuss the letter of the month, writing a letter to your U.S. Senator to ask them to advance their support for Senate Joint Resolution 51, aka SJRes 51, aka SJR 51, the Senate companion to House Joint Resolution 2, both of which propose the Democracy for All amendment language. I'd like to start, though, by sharing some ideas from a recent op-ed by Hari Han, a professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara, who studies organizational development. And in the letter, she wrote about the organizational lessons that often go unnoticed in the debates on abortion and gun rights, namely the strengths of the anti-abortion movement and the NRA that any organizer, regardless of your views on these issues, can learn from. So first, on the anti-abortion movement, she writes, quote, "The sociologist Ziad Munson has found that almost half of the activists on the front lines of the anti-abortion movement were not anti-abortion when they attended their first event. They attended because a friend asked them, they had just joined a new church, or they retired and had more free time. They stayed, however, because at these events, they found things we all want: friends, responsibility, a sense that what they are doing matters. By finding fellowship and responsibility, these people change not only their views on abortion, but also their commitment to act." End quote. And then to summarize what she points out about the NRA, comparing gun control groups to the NRA, Han points out the difference in the asks that these groups made. So she talks about how after Sandy Hook, she joined several gun control organizations, and they asked her to, quote, "send emails or make phone calls." In contrast, gun rights groups ask people to participate and lead in politics. They bring people off the sidelines of public life and teach them to speak truth to power, end quote. So these are definitely ideas that I'm thinking about in relation to our movement, and hope you guys can as well. In your APA, are you providing people with a sense of belonging and meaning? Are you asking your fellow citizens to take on enough responsibility that they feel like they're really doing something? Again, to repeat one line that I especially love, they stayed, however, because at these events, they found things we all want: friends, responsibility, a sense that what they are doing matters. All right, and with that, I would now like to introduce our guest speaker, Jim Rubens. Senator Rubens is a former two-term Republican state senator from New Hampshire. He also served as chair of the New Hampshire GOP Platform Committee and is a GOP candidate for U.S. Senate and governor. Senator Rubens has also been board president of a substance abuse program and suicide prevention hotline. Currently, he is a private venture investor, the New England chair of Take Back Our Republic, and a member of American Promise's board of directors, which is a new position after years of his involvement working with us, motivated by a deep concern about the corrupting influence of concentrated money on Republican principles. Senator Rubens worked with American Promise and others to help pass the resolution in New Hampshire calling on Congress for the 28th Amendment, making it for 20 states to have passed such resolutions. And Senator Rubens, I think you'll find that the people we've got calling in are kindred spirits. They're American patriots fighting to uphold our great experiment in self-government, people who care about other people, citizens who take responsibility, people like Susan Weber-Zeyer. Susan works on a national level with Burn Pits 360, advocating for veterans who were exposed to hazardous waste in Iraq and Afghanistan. and in this work, she often has difficulty getting notice for her issue. She says, quote, "The groups that have money can get meetings. We're a small nonprofit group that has to fight for access to meetings with legislators." So motivated by this experience, she is now also an active member of the Port Clinton, Ohio APA, and using her advocacy skills to also advance the 28th Amendment. And I hope everyone's brought that spirit of advocacy to tonight's call. I will be asking Senator Rubens a few questions myself, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from you guys. So please be thinking of questions, and when you do think of a question, know that others will probably have that same question, either now or after the call. So please ask it for everyone's benefit. And the way that you can do that is to press 1 on your keypad to raise your hand. All right, and with that, Senator Rubens, I will turn it over to you. You are off mute. Please tell us about your experience.
Indeed. Thank you, Kimberly, for having me this evening. So the mission, this issue has become excessively partisan. And so a key part of the mission in advancing this central effort to reduce corruption in the United States that prevents all of us, regardless of our political perspective, from America solving its problems, a central part of the work entails making this more bipartisan by getting more conservatives, more libertarian-type elected officials on board. How do you do that? Given that I find in most people working in the movement tend to be moderates or progressives, and so there's a trust gap by virtue of unknown people asking for meetings, people who have perhaps not been trusted in the past. So an important part of the work begins with activist networking. Very, very important to dig in your contacts and find people who know people who know your target audience, your target members of a state legislature, particularly committee chairpersons, speakers of the House, presidents of the state Senate. So work to find people who have personal relationships with those individuals. And as you network, keep in mind you're looking for people who are trusted by those members, those committee chairmen and speaker and president of the Senate. And it might be someone who's adjacent to your network. And it's surprising how many of us know people who know people. Just dig, look over your list, and get meetings with those people who can get meetings. And then once you bring those people in, people who are trusted conservatives, liberty-minded Republicans, once you bring them in, then work with them on getting high-quality meetings with your target member in your particular state to advocate on behalf of the 28th Amendment. I just had the great pleasure of going to several meetings with Republican leadership in Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania House and Senate are run by conservative Republicans. And Azor Cole, who's part of the American Promise team, did a staggeringly good job of getting meetings with the committee chairman and leaders of the Senate. And this is where messaging comes in. Once you have meetings and there are people at the meetings who are trusted and who can be heard by your target members, you got to begin, because a number of us on this issue come from moderates or from the left. It's really important to start by respecting and honoring conservative principles. And principled Republicans, principled conservatives share certain values about the strength of the United States with progressives and moderates. And these are arguments, and I'll just sum up these two arguments that I find work pretty well lately. I've been fine-tuning them for 20 years, so these are the ones that seem to be working this year and last year, particularly this year. And again, begin by honoring conservative principles, Republican principles. And it doesn't mean you're for or against Trump. Don't worry about that. Think about core principles. And one of the principles that's important is the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The 10th Amendment reserves powers not expressly delegated to the federal government, to the states, or to the people respectively. Now, how does that tie in with Republicans and conservatives? The way that this big money, corrupt campaign system is working now is pissing off conservatives in various states, because big money, a handful of people, are able to spend tons of money recruiting candidates. Often the candidates are from out of state, they're unknown, they meet certain criteria that both on the right and left that people want, and they're inserted into states bypassing the grassroots candidate selection process. And what this does is it's resulted in nationalizing many, many issues. The 10th Amendment enhances and celebrates these laboratories of democracy, which are the states, and by having nationalized elections by virtue of big concentrated money coming from places like California, San Francisco, New York City, we've lost the value of states taking different approaches on different issues, the laboratories of democracy, doing things in ways that meet the needs of the state, where people in the state, grassroots people and voters selecting candidates based upon those candidates' connection to the state, knowledge of the state, willingness to be specific about the needs of the state. And in these meetings in Pennsylvania, I raised this issue, and members of the legislature piped in, almost came right out of their chair, talking about instances where candidates were imported into districts and huge sums of money brought in from out of state, bypassing state political networks. So that's one issue, and it ties directly with big concentrated money. And so speaking about big concentrated money, using language that ties into the loss of the conservative principle of, I'll use the older and dirtier word, states' rights, but you can call it 10th Amendment, the laboratories of democracy, the rights of states to solve problems in unique ways that are specific to those states. That conservative principle is worth defending. The second issue that I think is worthwhile and workable, you may know that Republicans for 2020 are gearing up a campaign focused on capitalism versus socialism. And principled Republicans and all Americans like capitalism, and I'm talking about free market capitalism. This is a type of capitalism where companies compete by offering consumers good quality products and services better than their competitors are. What we've morphed into in the United States, and this is directly tied into our corrupt campaign money system, we've morphed into crony capitalism. And young people under 35 for the first time, now have a favorable impression about socialism. So Republicans have a real issue here. If you look at polling on people who are non-white, who will be majority of voters in the United States in 20 years, in a generation, those people do not trust capitalism anymore. So Republicans and conservatives who like the idea of the free market, I love it myself because it's delivered greater wealth, prosperity, and well-being, not just in the United States, but throughout the world in the past 230 years since the United States unleashed free market capitalism. We are losing free market capitalism specifically and directly because of the corrupt campaign money system. So for conservatives who want to defend free market capitalism, we've got to attack and push back against crony capitalism, where companies will amass big sums of money by politicians or be extorted by politicians, and the companies will succeed in the marketplace by buying from Washington regulatory favors, tax favors, contracts, and this is a central element resulting in and leading to particularly young people in America losing confidence in free market capitalism. So if conservatives really do want to push back against socialism and defend free markets, we need to deal with the corrupt campaign money system. So those are two subjects that get to the hearts of conservatives. And again, you begin conversation with conservatives, your targets, by respecting and honoring core principles of conservatism. There is a crossover between principled people on the left and principled people on the right on some of these issues. And if you begin with respect, network, find a way to find people who can get you good quality meetings. And it can take a while, but it's worth probing your lists extensively. That's important work. I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it's great to have that insight into how to get those meetings, and then in those meetings, what to say, especially among with Republican elected officials, because there is this discrepancy. Certainly at the congressional level, it's evident in that among the 100 plus supporters we have on House bills and the supporters we have on SJR 51, we only have one Republican representative, John Katko from New York, who's co-sponsoring. And so one question that I think a lot of our members are having is, we draw a lot of motivation from the knowledge that among the voter base, this issue, support for a constitutional amendment to get money out of politics, has widespread support at the voter base. And
yes.
so I'm wondering if you can
including among Republicans.
Right,
exactly. About 2 out of 3 Republican voters back something like the 28th Amendment.
Exactly, right, yeah. So it's, 75% of Americans, including 66% of Republicans, right. And so what's the discrepancy here? Why is it that 66% of Republican voters support it, and then at the congressional level, apparently only one Republican supports it?
Yeah. Well, the higher up one goes in politics, the more partisan and divided things have become. I think in part due to the campaign money system. If you stray from the central, not the principles, but the central legislative goals of the two parties, you'll get primaried. So many people, both even at the state level, I've seen people shrink away from support for the 28th Amendment and other money reform issues because they're worried about getting targeted by Americans for Prosperity and getting taken out in a primary for not being sufficiently conservative. So the supporters of big, concentrated, corrupt, and I'll call it corrupt because it's something that is fostering crony capitalism. The people who are financing these type of candidates who support the system as we have it now are scary because they got a lot of money. So it's important to bring people to these meetings and show conservatives that we're not just here. You got to be really careful about this. We're not here just to elect Democrats and we're going to be nice to you because you're in office. We've got to be defending people in primaries, Republican primaries, against people who are backing corruption. We've got to back pro-reform, pro-28th Amendment candidates during Republican primaries. So it's very important for people to earn respect by showing, full respect for Republican principles, and not just, because you're in office, we're going to treat you nicely, but then we're going to turncoat on you, and what we really want is a Democrat in your seat. That doesn't build trust. So it's important to show respect for conservative principles. It's also very important to bring on board known Republican, conservatives, liberty-minded, libertarian, grassroots activists, and make them part of your network. So when you're in these meetings, it doesn't look like there's going to be a bait and switch here. That make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, that segues into the last question I'll ask before I turn it over to our audience. And so again, I feel like you've shared with us how to get the meetings, and then when we're in the meetings, points to make, and then this latest tip of follow that up with continuing to support supportive Republicans when they're running for re-election. And that point that you brought up about kind of going back to the beginning of before you have those meetings, having, grassroots Republican supporters. That's also something that our moderate and progressive volunteers struggle with is a sense that they can't seem to, get conservatives to join their ranks or to organize. Do you have any tips, if that's something that you've seen, do you have any tips there for how to get, connect with grassroots conservative support?
Friends of friends. That's why I say this is the first thing I said. Mine, every one of us who's an activist in this, mine your personal networks. Everyone is going to know people who are somewhere in their network, principled conservatives, principled Republicans, who are willing to talk about this issue and can be brought on board using the Harry Hahn rules, friends, responsibility, work that matters. I found that I can bring conservatives on board once they're open just to sitting down and talking, and be persuaded using some of those arguments, the two that I mentioned there, can move minds, because conservatives really do like capitalism, free market capitalism, not crony capitalism, really do like candidates that are connected to their states and their local districts, as opposed to being imported from out of state by Michael Bloomberg or what have you. And I can use a Republican example. I can use examples from either party. Those arguments will work, but again, mine your networks. Find people who come from the right, who are trusted by people on the right. Bring them on board.
Awesome, thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to our audience. So if you have a question, please press 1 on your keypad. Awesome. All right, Joan, you are off mute. If you could let everyone know where you're calling in from, and then what your question is.
Yes, my name's Joan DeVore. I'm calling from the Tri-County American Promise chapter in southern New Jersey. And this information is really, really valuable. Thank you so much, Senator, for coming on this call. And my question is, you were mentioning how you were speaking with folks in Pennsylvania, and they right away got your point. Do you... if we're able to get these meetings, do you suggest that we focus on open-ended questions to get people to share their experiences about crony capitalism and fear of being primaried, stuff like that, or to provide examples? And if you say perhaps we should have some specific examples of how we see this happening in elections, is there a source of information or a way that we can identify these examples and come armed with some to start the conversation going?
Yeah, 2 answers to that. One is to listen. when you get into
Yes.
meetings, start the conversation, but if get your target member talking, if you possibly can, about your subject. And so people who talk too much at meetings are not so hot. And secondly, you're mining your networks. You're going to find people, and you will. Everyone knows people who are principled conservatives when you mine your network. Those folks are going to have examples they're going to know about specifically, particularly if they're active Republicans. They're going to have the examples that you could raise as conversation starters. The imported candidate, the candidate who seemed to come from nowhere, who doesn't actually represent the district, supported by out-of-state big money, what have you, and who pisses off the grassroots networks. Typically, in state Republican activists have long-term relationships that have built up over time, and so that members know people and supporters that built up over time. So you're looking to find people not only who can get you meetings, but who have information that can result in great conversation starters.
Just realized I was on mute. Great question and answer. All right. Next up, Ashwari, you are off mute. If you could let everyone know where you're calling in from and what your question is.
Hi there. Thank you. I'm calling from Santa Fe, New Mexico. And Senator, my question for you is pertains to what you said about the 28th Amendment is widely supported by the voter base, but the higher up elected officials get, the more partisan they seem to be. Can you say what the actual Republican platform states about concentrated money in politics? Is there anything in that actual platform that gives kind of an official position?
Yeah, no, you're not going to find it there, but you'll find clear support for what used to be called states' rights, but the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment was red hot when I was in the state Senate in the 1990s. It was very, very important to Republicans at the time. It's perhaps less so now, but remind people of it because that is what gives states the power to do things differently among one another, and to experiment and to find the way that works in that particular state, and so that states can innovate and political solutions boil up more rapidly when states can innovate on a varied basis. So you're not going to find, support for anti-big money in the Republican platform, but you'll also find support for free markets. And Republicans, and again, find examples that work within your state. There are going to be examples of things where the marketplace is not working. You might, in my state, in the northern half of my state in New Hampshire, the cell service and broadband is very spotty because we have oligopolies. We have near monopolies of broadband and cell phone service, and it's really inhibiting business activity in the northern part of our state. In your state, you're going to be able to find examples where crony capitalism is hurting the economy in your state, and you can raise those examples and talk about how the corrupt big money system is making this happen. Also, I should add, not an answer to your question, but be careful of language. When you're speaking with conservatives, spend time, and this is where mining your networks and having meetings with people who are activists before you get your member meetings. Learn the kind of language that turns conservatives off and the kind of language that is more friendly. You can mean the same thing, but if you say, well, we really want to fix global warming, this is why I'm here to have a meeting with you, that may be your purpose in the end, but that may turn off your target. So be careful about what examples you use. Be careful about language that is colored excessively on the left, and find language which you know will work in your state on the right among conservatives. A parenthetical comment, not an answer to your question, but I forgot to mention that. All done.
Yeah, totally fine. Always glad to have more thoughts. And I think for our last question, I'm Nancy, you are off mute. If you could let everyone know where you're calling in from and what your question is.
Thanks, everybody. Nancy Morgan from Northern Virginia. And this is a really interesting conversation for me because I'm a Democrat, but I'm also an economist, and I'm a believer in free markets and free trade and immigration, which are a lot of Republican platforms. So the question for me is, and some of my colleagues are listening to this call too, and we're from Northern Virginia, which is sort of a blue bubble. So how do we engage with private sector and we, get private sector through local chamber of commerce to create friends of friends, to influence people in Southern Virginia on talking about the importance of free markets and innovation and investment and the issue of crony capitalism? How can we use private sector to move our message?
Well, I just published an op-ed in The Hill last week, and I hyperlinked to a white paper done by the, forgive me, I could, Kimberly, do you have access to that Hill op-ed?
I'm pulling it up right now.
Yeah, maybe if you could email it to everyone. In it is a hyperlink to that white paper from the conference board. The conference board expressly links a reduction in business formation, general innovation in business, and competitiveness in American industry to the corrupt big money campaign financing system. And they provide examples in that white paper. So that, and a document put out by American Promise, perhaps send that around and send it to Nancy. American Promise has a business a business organizing organization, and you too. American Promise has a good, I think it's a 1.5, 2-page brief bulletin summarizing the arguments that will be persuasive to business, particularly business that are pro-innovation, pro-competition, and want to see America leading industries. Is that helpful, Nancy?
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you very
You're going
much.
to find good material, good arguments, good material, good examples in those two documents. that Kimberly can send out.
Yes, absolutely. And Nancy is one of our best. Good question as usual, and I'm sure she'll help me, assess those resources and spread them around.
May I add to the answer for Nancy? One of the things that really concerns me, I invest in startup companies. We have seen new business formation over the past 20, 30 years in the United States. For at least the first time in a century, we have more businesses dying than being born. This is very new and really not a good symptom in the United States, that we're having a reduction in new business formation. Central to American prosperity long term is a healthy rate of new business formation. So when it's like telling a patient about blood pressure. Your blood pressure is too high. This is something that really concerns chambers of commerce. And chambers of commerce also tend to be, having spoken at many of them in my state here as I campaign, they tend to be small and medium-sized business members, and have those people who run those businesses have been personally exposed to the impact of concentrated industrial concentration. So, for example, if you're, as I do, investing in startup companies, there are fewer acquiring companies. So it's much, much harder to get a startup company up off the ground, acquired, or go public because of the barriers, the increased barriers to entry. That's another example that inspires and motivates particularly people who are in small business or mid-sized businesses.
Thank you for the addition. Yeah, all of these ideas, right, how in terms of, connecting with citizens and businesses locally, and then once we have that support, getting the meetings where we can turn those, shows of support into political action from our representatives with the right talking points.
Yeah.
All very useful.
I'll elaborate just a little bit more to Nancy's question. I've been able to get phenomenal meetings with U.S. senators on subjects that they didn't want to take meetings on. I would never have been able to get meetings on certain subjects with those U.S. senators, but I was able to bring aboard business people who are respected, who are constituents of that particular target member, who know them and have relationships with them, people who are positioned so well with that target member that there's no way that the request for the meeting can be refused. So again, as you mine your networks, it might be a relationship of a relationship that results in finding such a person who owns a business, who has such a relationship with your target member that they cannot say no to the meeting request. Find people like that. They'll pay you big dividends.
Thank you. Yeah, perfect. And so I'll do my best to summarize. Again, everyone, we're looking to mine our networks and find those principled conservatives and local business connections. And then, with those people in coordination, get meetings with our elected officials, perhaps through those people, and then attending those meetings again, with known conservatives, business people, and bringing the talking points that Senator Rubens discussed, which I'll send out in our recap email. We'll have links to documents that you can use to cite those and make sure that you're being clear about them. And so with that, Senator Rubens, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, volunteers, for working on this. None of this happens without committed people like you folks.
Here. Apologies. I just realized I put myself on mute, and my whole segue there was thoroughly underappreciated, I'm sure. All right.
Kimberly, that's okay. I was saying the same thing. I'm like, I can't hear Kimberly, but I was on mute as well. So you're both apologizing, and no one can hear us, but that's okay.
All right. So let's take a stab at this again. As Senator Rubens said, thank you to everyone who is listening to this call or its recording for the work that you are doing in your states. And as we do each month, I want to give you guys an update on how that work is contributing to our national goals. So first up, meetings with elected officials. Our goal for this year is 200, and we're at 72 right now. Considering that we expect about 100 meetings from Lobby Day alone, that is great, so keep it up. Next up, public events. Our goal for 2019 is 80 public events, and we're already at 65. So again, great progress, keep it up. And finally, media pieces. So given our past success and the new APAs that have formed in the last year, our goal for 2019 is 212 media pieces published. Right now, over halfway through the year, we are only at 57 of 212. So this is an area for us to work on. Some tips. One, have multiple people in your APAs writing letters. Experience shows that when a publication receives multiple letters on a single topic, aka the 28th Amendment, they're more likely to publish at least one of those letters. And two, second tip, send those letters to multiple publications. An easy way that you can magnify the number of people you're reaching is by framing your letters in such a way that they can be sent to multiple publications, and then doing just that. So again, have multiple people submit letters to a publication and submit those letters to multiple publications. If you have any questions or if there's anything we can do to help you guys become letter machines, please let me or Rosie know. And the critical step in tracking all of this growth, the meetings with elected officials, the public events, the media pieces, is to be reporting those. So please submit reporting forms, which you can do on the resources tab of the website, americanpromise.net. And this month we have some special updates on our goals for the National Citizen Leadership Conference. That's coming up October 19th to 21st in BC. For NCLC, our goal is to have 300 attendees, and we are currently at 95 people registered. And for Lobby Day in particular, which is Monday, October 21st, our goal is 100 meetings, and we are currently at 17. So as has come up a few times on this call, keep mining your network, your friends of friends, for people to bring to NCLC, and remember to use the discount codes that your APA leaders have to give those people, if they're APA members, a flat rate of $100, or if they are friends, a 10% discount. Going back to the ideas from Hari Han, NCLC and Lobby Day in particular are really great opportunities to provide people with friends and with a sense of meaning. So when you're making those asks, don't feel timid. Know that, be emboldened with the knowledge that you're providing people an opportunity to have friends and to have a sense of meaning. All right, and now I get to turn it over to Vicki Barnes from Minnesota for some grassroots insight. As we prepare to ask for further support from our senators, especially Republican senators, Vicki's going to tell us about her experience meeting with Republican elected officials, from state legislatures to U.S. Representative Eric Paulson. And so with that, Vicki, thank you for being with us. You are off mute.
Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you, Senator Rubens. I've kind of been stalking you. I really like what you have to say, so I steal a lot of what you say, so thank you so much. Just as far as a meeting with Republican legislators, my experience has been kind of mixed, but we all want to go for a big victory. We can't do that without first learning how to acknowledge the small victories that get us there. So starting with Eric Paulson in 2017, I was able to meet with him through a constituent of his, and that was the first victory, having a constituent come up to me after a meeting and volunteer to set up the appointment. Since Paulson wasn't in my district, I knew it would be difficult to meet with him, and I usually request a constituent's help in getting a meeting with an elected official at the end of my presentation, and someone actually finally took me up on it. So we followed Sam Daly Harris's advice and researched Paulson and his record. And when it came time to meet, we started the meeting by thanking him for his work in sponsoring legislation to benefit survivors of human trafficking. It was a bipartisan bill he sponsored with Senator Klobuchar. His face lit up, and he said that he was thinking of all the survivors he'd spoken with as the legislation was signed into law. He was very proud of that accomplishment. So that was victory number 2. He is human, and he's allowed to be proud of his accomplishments. As a father to 4 daughters, I'm sure this was an important win for him. We explained why we were there and asked how he felt about the issue of money in politics, specifically independent expenditures. He said that while he did not like money being spent against him, he also does benefit from money being spent in his favor, so it's kind of a wash. That was another victory. I liked his honesty. I slid the amendment in front of him on the table, deliberately showing the names of the co-sponsors, and asked if he saw a reason that he would not support the bill. He said right off the bat that I would say there are a lot of names of Democrats. So that was victory number 4. Again, I felt he was honest in his initial reaction and was not trying to handle us. His constituent pointed out that one of the reasons we were approaching him is because he has a history of working across the aisle. So we shared information about American Promise and the work we're doing nationally. In all, it was a nice conversation. It was easy to see why his fellow members of Congress, especially the leadership, would like him. And when the meeting was over and we were getting ready to leave, I thanked him, and while shaking his hand, I said that passing the legislation to address human trafficking was a great legacy for him. But imagine what the legacy of being part of the passage of an amendment to the United States Constitution that would restore the American promise of fair and equal representation would mean for his children and his grandchildren to come. He said that if Minnesota, a Republican-controlled legislature at the time, would pass the state resolution, he would put his name as co-sponsor on the amendment. But the old guard would never go for it. That was victory number 5. He was acknowledging that the leadership would never let it happen. So I learned a lot, and I respected the openness of Paulson's responses, and I was and remain very grateful for the constituent and his involvement. And in regards to the state legislature, this past session, I met with 4 Republican senators. And again, I was grateful for the experience and, of course, didn't walk away with somebody's name on the bill, on the resolution. But one of them said to me, "You don't have to tell me about money in politics. I go to the grocery store. I hear about it all the time." So he's acknowledging that he knows his constituents are worried about this issue. Another one said, "I don't think this resolution goes far enough. I think that only the voters eligible to vote in that election should be able to contribute to campaigns and only individuals." And you could see the wheels turning. He was trying not to go to the next obvious step, which would be we would need to have public funding of elections for that. But that was a lot. That was very interesting to learn. And then another Republican senator had introduced the Wolf Pack bill, calling on a constitutional convention to pass the 28th Amendment. And he took his name off afterwards. And when we asked him about that, he said that he was told he's a nobody, shut the hell up and get in line. So without hearing back from those first 2 senators, I knew that their leadership, and especially with that last senator, the leadership was the big block with this. They recognize it, they're concerned about it, but the leadership does not want it to move forward. So again, not a victory there, but I understand a little bit more about what they're facing, and we'll see what this second half of the session brings us.
Thanks, Vicki. Yeah, it's great insight to have because it is frustrating knowing that this issue has cross-partisan support among voters. To see such partisan support among elected officials, and so at least it's good to know that the huge absence of Republicans is just being controlled by Republican elected officials, I should say, is being controlled by just a few at the top, and that most Republican elected officials also support this amendment and know about it. I really like that line. You don't need to tell me about money in politics. I go to the grocery store. And right, really encourage all of you to take up that mindset of counting the small victories along the way. Getting a constituent being willing to help you get a meeting, getting a Republican elected official to smile, and getting them to be honest and provide feedback. So thank you again, Vicki. Those are all great things to keep in mind. And I am now going to turn it over to Rosie, who is going to introduce the letter of the month and this month's training.
Thanks for sharing.
You are off mute, Rosie.
Oh, hello. Great. Thanks so much for sharing, Vicki. Today is actually, we talked about it earlier today at work, National Smile Day, and that story just made me smile a whole bunch, so thank you again. This month's letter is to our senators to ask for their further support for the Senate Joint Resolution 51, aka SJRes 51, also known as SJR 51. And in this action sheet attached to the emails for this call, including tomorrow's recap, we did our best to lay out everything you guys need to know to write these letters. Again, SJR is the Senate companion bill to House Joint Resolution 2, both of which, and HJR 48, both of which propose the Democracy for All amendment language. SJR 51 is already co-sponsored by every Democratic and Independent senator, but no Republican senators, unfortunately, yet. So if you have a Republican senator, your ask is definitely from the co-sponsor of this bill. But even if you have a Democratic or Independent senator, you can always ask them to provide more active support for SJR1, because it was introduced July 30th, and I haven't heard too much in the news about it yet. I understand the news cycle can be a little chaotic, but we definitely want there to be more coverage of this legislation. So to be reaching out to your Republican colleagues and reaching out to your Democratic senators, if you don't have a Republican senator, they can reach out to their Republican colleagues and work to win their co-sponsorships. So another ask in all making our letters is to follow up by meeting with our senators. So tonight's training is going to be all about preparing for those meetings. To start off, I'm curious to ask the audience, you can just press 1 on your keypad, who has met with their senator or a staffer in the senator's office and can tell us pretty quickly about their experience. If that's you, go ahead and press 1 on your keypad. Happy to hear from a couple of folks, too. Again, it doesn't have to be the senator directly if you met with a staffer or an aide in the senator's office.
Just give them a second, Rosie. It looks like the one on people's keypads might be jammed, because I know we have folks on this call who've met with their senators.
That's very true.
All right, folks. One taker. Press 1 on your keypad. All right. Okay. They're being shy tonight.
That's okay. No, it's totally fine. We will all get that experience with Lobby Day coming up. So anyone that hasn't taken this step yet, there are tons of stories out there to help you see that's totally possible for something you can do. I actually met with my own senator, Chuck Schumer, but he actually spoke at my graduation for college, and there was like a little meet and greet after. And while I wasn't working on American Promise yet, it was a quick little meeting just to thank him for all the work he was doing. And it's important to know, like, these people are just people. Like, they're public servants, and even if you don't agree with them on everything, it is good. It is good to know, like, they are very easy to talk to, because politicians, on average, are good to talk to. So tonight we're going to practice asking open-ended questions in these meetings, because sometimes politicians, aren't great at answering those. So asking open-ended questions to get our senators or a member of their staff talking about money in politics and that issue in their own words is a major part of any meeting, and is where you'll establish rapport and to learn about their needs to guide the best path forward. For example, you could ask your member of Congress, can you describe the fundraising process on Capitol Hill? Or what do you think of the Supreme Court decisions like Buckley v. Vallejo and Citizens United versus FEC? And for each, be prepared to follow up with more questions. When they respond, consider the other questions that have them think deeper. Why do you think that is? Could you say more about that? I know you think this way, but what would it take to change your mind? You don't ever want to ask a yes or no question, because then that conversation just ends. You want to make sure you have open-ended questions so that the conversation can keep going. I'm now going to ask for a brave volunteer. You can press 1 on your keypad who'd like to play themselves, someone who's in one of those meetings with the senator, a.k.a. me. My parents did name me Rosie Chandler Smith because they said it was a good name for a senator, so now's my time to shine. You'll ask me an open-ended question and then follow up with another question. the goal is just to keep me talking. So is there someone brave tonight on the line who will press 1 to volunteer for this role play? I'm on the phone, so I'm not going to bite, I promise. Kimberly, perhaps, would you... Oh, wait, do we have a hand? We do. It's Vicki Barnes. Thank you so much, Vicki. You are off mute.
You're welcome. I felt sorry for you.
Oh, that's okay. Nothing to feel sorry. It's just my parents' dream. So imagine you're walking into my office. We're here to talk about SJ 51, and I haven't signed on to it yet. I would like you to just ask me an open-ended question about money in politics. It could be a question that I used earlier or just your own question, and let's have like a 3-minute conversation with that.
Okay, Senator Smith, thank you so much for seeing me. I'm working on support for the amendment that is calling to get money out of politics through reversing, overturning Citizens United and other rulings. And I was wondering if you would be willing to share your experience with the concentrated money in politics, how you feel about that and how it affects you.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's my buddy Tom Udall's bill. Thank you so much for coming in. It's always good to meet a constituent. Yeah, money in politics, I'm definitely not in favor of. I have to spend so much of my time fundraising when I want to be having meetings with you and meeting with members of the community. A good 60% of, maybe 70% of my time I have to talk with donors and fundraisers, and I'm not enjoying it. I just don't know if I'm ready to sign on to this bill yet.
When you look at the bill, is there a part in there that kind of makes you hesitate, or any kind of change you feel that would help you support it more easily?
To be honest, yeah, that's an excellent question. I just think I need to read more into it. I understand there's one in the House, and I just thought that they were going to take care of it, but I understand that maybe the Senate could do something too. You know what, yeah, I do think I'll have an aide read it for me, or maybe even I'll spend this weekend reading it, and then I can make a more educated decision. We just get so many bills that it's hard to keep track of them sometimes.
Well, can you maybe go over what the biggest challenge is for you with the money in politics? I mean, I know that raising money is difficult and very time-consuming, and it's not really what you probably pictured you would be spending your time doing. Are there other issues that it's affected your ability to do your job, or your ability to feel like you're able to represent your people?
Oof, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth there, Vicki. But I would also go on to say that there's just so much gridlock in the Senate and the House, too, with so many people have their own agenda, and the agenda that's been bought for them. That a particular passion of mine is voter registration, and I would love to get the Senate version of HJR1, that voter registration expansion bill. But unfortunately, there's just so many people being bought off by other corporations and rich people that it's just doesn't have a chance presently, especially with our current Senate leader. So I'll just say that the lobbyists and the people having their own agenda, it's not in favor of the agenda and the representation and legislation that I would like to bring forward for our state. So that's a really good point, actually.
Well, just out of curiosity, if you were to put your name on that bill, what kind of is there a downside to doing that? Do you think there'd be some kind of consequence that you would face for supporting something like that?
That's a good question. I think the only thing would be, to be quite honest with you, I do get some money from some bigger corporations and rich people, and I feel if I put my name, and that helps me stay in office so I can serve you guys better. But I fear that if I sign on to a bill that limits those corporations' freedom of speech, then they will pull out their support, and then I won't be able to represent you guys very well, and then they'll just back another person that won't be able to represent you guys as well. So that's my fear. But I understand that's kind of backwards.
No, I understand. Yeah, I understand that, and it's a legitimate concern. But if you were to support the bill, we would be happy to help you educate your constituents about the importance of that so that they understand how you are actually working for them over anybody else, any other special interest group. But I appreciate your honesty.
I appreciate these questions too, Vicki. Thank you so much. And scene. That was so good, Vicki. Thank you. Well, how do you think you did? Is there anything you would have changed? Anything that you think went pretty well? Any feedback, I suppose?
Well, I don't know if I was pushing it by asking whether or not you would, find it have any consequences for signing the bill.
Oh no, I like that.
Something? Is that okay? So that wasn't going too far.
No, I liked it.
Okay.
You crushed it. In my opinion, at least, I thought you did excellent. Now I want to become a senator and have to be in that awkward situation. But awesome. Thank you so much for volunteering.
You're welcome.
Really, really
Kimberly.
Fantastic job. I'm going to turn it back to Kimberly to close out our call.
Yes, thank you, Senator Smith, and thank you again, Vicki. One point that I'd like to follow up on that role play, it was a great point that Vicki made, that if Senator Smith supported the bill, they would be able to educate constituents about that issue and about Senator Smith's support for it. And that's absolutely a great answer. And so if you're wondering, how is it that we do that, that would tie in with our candidate pledge program. So, by supporting the amendment, someone who supports the amendment as a co-sponsor would certainly, should automatically be able to sign the candidate pledge, which, would result in them having graphics and social media posts from us about their support for a 28th Amendment to end money in politics. But a key part of being able to say that is that you have done the work and built a network back in your community. And so that's why it's important, there are lots of different kinds of goals that we talk about, meeting with elected officials, but also writing letters to the editor and doing outreach. And it is worthwhile to be pursuing all of these avenues at once. So that you can go into a meeting with an elected official with a printed off example of a letter that was published in a local publication, and also with the local community network to be able to say that you would be able to educate constituents because you're in touch with constituents. So that was a great answer that, to kind of unpack it, touches on a lot of things to be thinking about and motivating, all of the things that you are doing as an American Promise Association. And so as we come up on 9 p.m. Eastern Time, I just want to close out by saying thank you again to all of you live on the call and listening to the recording for all of that work that you are doing. And I'm going to take everyone off mute so that we could say goodbye to one another. One moment. All right. Thanks, everyone, and good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.